I want to thank you for this very kind invitation to be here in Galway. Yesterday very sunny but beautiful green Galway. To share, but I would rather say to participate with you and you with me, to reflect on what has been done, what have we been doing, but with the vision or with the view of what can we still do next. And I heard Andrina, and my sincere thanks to Andrina and to Anne and the QQI for organizing also this workshop. We heard that Ireland has done already a lot. I will take much more European perspective and also talk about the 2012 recommendation. But the European perspective is very deliberate because we are not comparing countries. We are not finding out the progress per country or per region. We look to the overall view, what happens in Europe, and we are stimulating and enhancing the peer learning between the regions, and that has all to do with subsidiarity. But I've always loved the last 30 years indeed to do much more peer learning, because we are, like you all together, sitting, reflecting, discussing, criticizing, discussing again, having new avenues and ideas, coming from the bottom up, from you stakeholders. And at the end, even it is a longer process, maybe, it's a very steady process where that you can build up and where you have a lot of benefits for education and training and the skills agenda. Meeting today is a privilege for me, and it's a bit also primeur, because you are the first country, and in that sense quite advanced, to say, let us meet and let us already start thinking about what next, as we are at a very important momentum, European-wide, and on the topic of validation of informal and non-formal learning. Already the topic informal and non-formal learning might have to be broadened to prior learning, like you are saying, like we heard at the Biennale. But the recommendation is about informal and non-formal learning. Why it is such a momentum? Because in the recommendation it's clearly said that by the end of 2018, the recommendation is on a voluntary basis asking the member states to implement validation arrangements. It doesn't mean to change their legislation or policy, but to implement working arrangements towards more validation. And that has happened. I will show you that. The end of 2018 saw the member states on its highest level in the AQF AG, so the European Qualification Framework Advisory Group, is listening and reflecting and commenting on the one-off reports that member states are presenting. And only a few have already presented, and this continues. But the momentum is also there. We go to a new commission. The end of 2018, what will we do with the recommendation? What will be the next program? Is it not the moment that we may take another step, a step forward, and that we build on the early days and all your experiences of all the stakeholders to say, look, it's time to structure the domain, it's time to do more, it's time to, and that I want to discuss with you. I will go quite quickly through a few transparencies and to show you where we are at the moment, But you all know that all learning matters. And this is one of the important messages. For me, validation of informal and non-formal learning, of validation of prior learning, is for me a real lifelong learning issue. That is what lifelong learning is about. And it's one of those dossiers, and I always say it's a positive dossier due to that. But it's not about institutions, it's about the individual, the learner. And that's also where the problems are. Because to reach the learner, to make the learner aware, to guide the learner, to get validation, and this across so many sectors that a learner can meet or is in during its life, that's quite a challenge. But at the end of the day, it's the learner, and to know that all learning counts. And we know that 80-85% of that learning is not happening in formal education. It's happening beyond, outside. This is a graphic you can use. You will receive all the transparencies. I have more than I will use, but I kept them together so that you can reflect or use them yourself in your work. I don't need to say, I think that the transparencies are a bit, okay. With the transfer we lost a few things. We have, of course, quite a lot of European policies where validation on informal and non-formal learning is connected to. You know it all. I will not stand still, but in 2012, it was a start on European level, but it built further on, of course, quite already many existing practices and work in the regions and in the member states. But in 2012, that recommendation came, and it has until now been very interesting to see what it did, and it's still fresh. It's not, it didn't become old or outdated. I think that what's in that recommendation is still helpful to do the work around informal or validation of prior learning or informal and non-formal learning. It is clearly the member states and the regions who have to implement, but there is support, European support. There is the Erasmus Plus with projects, and we are helping through guidelines and the inventory. You know that in the guidelines there were 10 fundamental values, and I want just to recall them, and especially the first one is so important. At the central place, it is the individual in a lifelong learning process. And so I recall the two things that are very important: all learning matters, and it's complementary. All different stakeholders and sectors are involved, and it's especially that coming together and the bridge between those sectors, which is its wisdom, but also its challenge. We will see that. This is a kind of animation to show that all these things are very much connected, that all kinds of learning should be validated and recognized with our 4 stages that a lot of the practitioners and the policymakers are using to get to outcomes like credits, formal qualification, and so on. And those different outcomes are being looked to in the different stages. But it is especially that individual. And immediately I am touching on something where maybe the recommendation, and it's not me influencing you, I will show you the results of other reports that are indicating that the guidance dimension was less central in the recommendation and is appearing to be very central. Without guidance, no proper validation, and inverse. So those two are really intertwined, because your individual is there and need that kind of guidance. So guidance and validation processes are coming much more together. And that might be. So you know the European guidelines, you know that we have done a European inventory, we have done it several times, and now we have the update. The country reports have been already looked in it, have been sent to us, and a draft synthesis report is already at the Commission. We do this, the European Commission this time, it's not CEDEFOP, but the European Commission who is doing this European inventory, and we gave already a few results as a premier, but also saying that be careful, we are still discussing how to present those results. But it might stimulate the debate on what is. You know that this is an enormous rich source, you're using it. There is not only individual country reports, also now we will have different thematic studies, also on employers. We will have international studies. We saw that it's getting very important also to look to the world. We will try to gather a compendium of projects, Erasmus, ESF, because there's a huge richdom of projects and we never have already compiled those together. And so you can find them. But let's have a first glimpse on the new results and what come out. And I want to trigger like that, particularly the discussion and the questions and the look forward. I start not like in the Biennale with some more negative, but let's say critical things, but I start with showing that a lot is done. We see that, you know, by 2018, so we can measure how many countries have implemented validation arrangements. And when you see 35, it means all the countries that have been studied. It are the 28 EU countries plus some ETF countries and the EEA. So in total 35 countries have been looked into. The blue ones there are the 2016, and you know that status. And you see that where we have as an update that on the labor market, some 4 more countries have done quite a lot more for the employment sector, and 1 country did a bit more on the 3rd sector. So the gap between the work done in the educational sector and the labor market is becoming a bit smaller. Still is something to work upon, and we need to have looked. And that bridge is showing especially that the bridge with the education sector of the labor market and the 3rd sector is still of a concern. But I am not saying something new. This is already for quite a while the case, and we work on it, but maybe not in the right direction. Let's think about it. So you see here the 2018, so the validation strategies that are in place, and you see from 2010 to 2018 that we have made considerable progress in the countries, and that we really have in 25 countries really working arrangements in place, and you are amongst those, and that in 11 of the countries things are in development, but quite some steps still have to take place. So we are not yet there where we thought in 2012 that maybe by 2018 most of the countries. There is still a bit of work, but in development sometimes mean just the last step to take. Like in Flanders, they are now in legislation. They had to go into legislation in order to make some changes in the validation process. As you have seen in education, things are going quite well. There, a lot of the implementation has taken place, and you see here the difference between 2016 and 2019, that even in all the sectors it has increased a little bit. So for education sector, we see things progressing and things have done. What we have then tried, and I'm very happy that Andrina went to the 2012 recommendation, we looked to the most important guidelines, the principles. And they have tried, so the ICF, the contractor, has tried to measure the progress or the number of countries that have progressed in 3 sectors, in education and training, labor market, and the third sector. So if we look to the first column, you see that 35 of all the countries have implemented it in the education and training sector, and that for 19 countries it is in the labor market sector implemented. And like that you can continue. If we look to guidance, you see that most of the countries have guidance and counseling along with validation in the education sector. But when we look to the third sector and the labor market, still a lot of work has to be done to bring guidance close to validation. While we do know that those processes go along, but they are not yet coming together. The links to the national qualification frameworks, that's very important. I don't need to plead for that close link, but you see also that there in the labor market and in the third sector, a lot of work still needs to happen, while in the education sector we are quite okay. So it's only in the professional development of staff that all the sectors are really quite low, and that is for sure a critical issue for the education sector to look into it. And disadvantaged groups, why don't we have the 3 colors? Because it was not measured for the sector based only for education and training along the various years. So methodologically it could not be shown. But you see there is also some work to be done on disadvantaged groups. So the guidelines have been looked, and they try to measure how far they are in the implementation European-wide. So for Ireland, you can do the exercise and say, okay, for guidance and counseling, maybe for the third sector, we have many more implementation work done or less. So you can try to find yourself where you are and fall back on the individual country reports. I have to recall you, it is not the idea or the intention is not to compare countries. It's not a competition, or it is just to show the important conditions and principles and where still work has to be done. And this can differ between the countries, between the regions, but overall you get trends, and you see the weak or the weak points or the points to work upon. This is complicated graph, but it summarizes, in fact, the update 2018 European inventory and the new data. And you can use it, still referring that it is draft, and the final report will only be published in September. I'll come back to that. Interesting to see, and you see why I didn't want to start with it, because when you look to it, you see a lot of red. We have to find another way of presenting, because if we present this to a new commissioner, she will say, what have you been doing the last years? But we have been working a lot. If you take the green and the orange together, so where you have an enormous high level of implementation on some of the actions, on some of the principles, together with a medium level of implementation, you do see that quite, so like guidance and counseling is readily accessible. It's quite
okay. But of course, if you only look to the green, there is a lot of work to be done to advance. On average, you take green and orange together, you see that again, the professional competences of staff is really a critical issue to work on, and that the skills audit, the assessment, professional assessment of what has been learned is also not easy to be done. If we look to the red, you can judge again professional competences, some synergies, disadvantaged groups, skills audit, transparency tools, compliance with agreed standards. But being with you who are experts and practitioners, this will not surprise you. We are talking about Europe, of course. You need to look to all the countries in Europe. If you show this, it's clear that we are in early days of validation and we need to do some next steps. And that we need to have a consultation to see how to do that to come further. This shows how 27 countries have accessibility to validation arrangements. 30 countries are giving exemptions, certificates. 15 countries, 29 countries are awarding a full or partial qualification. Sorry, can I go back? Yeah. Then you see that a lot of the countries are looking into that award partial or a full qualification. I have a few more detailed transparencies with me that looks into specific elements. I intend not to give too much explanation. If there is a question, we can come back to this transparency. But here you have the outcomes on the percentage of countries by type of outcome and by sector. And you see here that a full award or partial award provided on qualification, then it's very high in education, but also very high in the labor market. Access to formal education, of course, education and training is quite high. Training specifications for education is, of course, less high. So here you have some statistics or overviews that we have found. Let me just quickly go over it. Maybe the guidance is quite interesting. This is the number of countries that are providing guidance in the validation process. About the process, it is in 18 countries requirement that you are guided, that the individual is guided or coached. On the assessment, 15 countries are making it a requirement. And on the outcomes and discussing the outcomes, only 12 countries. So you see that validation in quite of a lot of countries, it's still something standing on its own. But when we go to the practices, this is not the case at all. We see that in the practices, validation is part of a whole system. And I say it is that holistic approach, that 360-degree approach, that is becoming more and more important. How it becomes visible at policy level and at practices, you see that it's not easy to measure. Still on the process, 18 countries are bringing guidance and validation close together. But when on assessment and on telling the outcomes and to help an individual to get an orientation to a certain individual pathway or an individual journey, go back to education, follow this part of training, do this or bring your work experience or do this type of work experience and come back. All those different so individualized journeys that you are discussing with each of your individuals or each of your people that are in a certain need, that range, it's clear that only 12 countries are looking into that, but it's already 12 countries. Because being so personalized in advice and guidance and validation requires quite some processes and systems and procedures. So this is an interesting thing. Okay, quality assurance, that indeed increased portfolios. I skipped that. We can say that 2012, 2018, it are only 6 years, it are clearly the early days, but a lot happened in the early days. In the practices, in the policy making. We have increasing arrangements, and in all countries there is progress and something is happening. It can be that it's only in the education and training sector, that's why sometimes the numbers on labor market and voluntary third sector are getting lower, but in quite a lot of countries the three sectors are in connection and are interacted to work. But comprehensiveness, connectiveness between the sectors is a big issue to work about. And if you are serious about real lifelong learning journeys for an individual, very personalized, this is becoming more and more important. You cannot leave it only in the education and training sector, labor market, third sector. Something has to happen to engage, to commit, to connect to them, to bridge. It's clear we are there with we need to work out how to do that. We need to learn from the practitioners how they do it. What can we do in policy making to increase that? Quality assurance and a variety of methods are used, but is it used for all type of learning? And guidance and counseling, they are common, but practitioners are lacking enough training and professionalization. These are general things. These are not new to you. And I hope that our discussions can go a little bit more into depth. What are the challenges then? As I said, early days, and speaking here personally, seeing this dossier and being project officer in this dossier for these years, I see that there are the early days of structuring, but the domain needs to structure itself more and more. And it's the reason why the professionalization is less ready yet, because that is for sure something that happens when your domain, your area where you work in, is getting stable in structuring. Where is the community? I mean, you're all very present and active, but here in Ireland, you could say there is an RPL practitioner community and network setup, but this is quite unique. That's not the case in a lot of other countries. Do we have a community building European-wide? Can we do something about that in order that the peer learning, the principles, the standards can be discussed? And in each of the regions and each of the countries, let's build up more that community. And it's about dissemination, it's about projects, it's about many things if you see about community building. So we are at a very interesting moment politically, because a new commission is coming, which makes us also very not knowing who will be responsible for the dossier. And if there is an interest, we are hoping that there is an interest. We have a recommendation that has not an end date, but a date of 2018 of implementation, and a request to the Commission to look into an evaluation. And so we are now starting to see how this recommendation has been taken up and to get some ideas, but these are the ideas coming from you, the stakeholders, what to do next. Of course, we have a lot of data, the inventory. It's quite rich and we can play with it, we can identify a lot. We have quite a lot of studies. The last study, the study on skills audits, was very interesting to see how skills audits are really adapting to the individual journeys to take, but that the way skills audits are being done is enormously diverse and fragmented. And it's the first time I use that term fragmented, but that's a bit where we are. We are in the days that there is fragmentation and that we have to structure that fragmentation in order to take a step further. We have all the one-off reports of the countries with an EQFAG that is very active, and policymakers. We have that high level of policymakers giving us advice, learning from each other, moving on. But we do want to have much more. The stakeholders, you in fact, their voice, and to listen to that voice. The evaluation study is looking into all those dimensions, but is also launching a consultation. It will be launched mid-June. It is a public consultation, and there is only one thing to say. Please go to the consultation and reply. Your ideas are taken up. It's clear that if we discuss the ideas here, your impact is bigger than when you're one of the 10,000 or the 40,000 who are replying. Maybe you could also reply as a network. Your impact then is larger. And I see some nodding, and of course there are other associations who will reply as an association and are consulting their stakeholders. But what matters is that you tell us what to do, what is needed. But 2 weeks ago we were at the VPL Biennale in Berlin. I would say there is something, you hear me talking about structuring, but I also want you to tell us your dream. What is the vision? I think that European Commission and a commissioner and some ideas for, I don't know, an extension of the recommendation, a new recommendation, a program, I don't know. You tell us that your ideas about how should it be for that individual, that is important to us, because if we know what is your dream, what's the dream of your individuals that you listen, is it about getting all learning also of the very low qualified people important, or is it also that about excellence and seeking talent inside employment? So all those facets, what counts for you, what is important for you? It will differ per country, per region, but there are some major messages. And I am saying that vision is important, because it's with a vision that the people like me can work and sell it, and we can start to build a program or give input to a recommendation, taking account of all subsidiarity. So this is what is going on. The evaluation report will be presented by the end of the year to the Council by the European Commission. We have a company who is doing a lot of the work for us. The online consultation will pop up half of June, will be open for 4 months. And now I don't reveal you the questions in the online consultation, but I give you some questions that appeared, and I made an overview, and that overview was also presented to the EQFAG to have a similar discussion, an overview of all possible discussions, meetings, peer learning activities, one-off reports, the inventory, The festival last year, not the Biennale, but the Biennale, you had some things that came back, and I brought those questions together, and I triggered now the discussion. I go just quickly through them. A lot of these, I would just like you to say that and that and that question, or that and that issue or heading is most important for us, and then we go into it. So let's go through it. First, what comes in all of the documents is that the objective is making visible and valuing, and especially that second thing is not easy to do. The individual and the learner at centrality, but that has major consequences. What are your validation methodologies? How can you make an individual aware that they can ask for validation? Is it accessible? Is guidance there? Should guidance and validation work more together? Is it together? Should we maybe start more to say validation and guidance and bring it the whole time as a process together? What does it really mean to go to those unique learning experiences? You are here in an individual learning journey. How many types do we have? How can we deal with that? And which methodologies can we use to capture all these? There are two quite important principles. Let's go to that lifelong dimension. It is really a lifelong and life-wide idea. For us, the first one, how can we engage and commit employers? For the moment, we don't see them. Ireland is different, but we don't see them engaging or committing. We want to maybe to have a good workshop and to ask some large companies and HR departments to say, what do you expect? You are doing it. We know you are doing it, but why does it stay so internal? Can you not make a joint venture with education, training, third sector? Of course we understand why a company uses skills audits and keeps it internal. But what with your small and medium enterprises? What can we do? How can we appeal? Can Europe do something? Or is it on national? Is it maybe sector-based? If it's sector-based, until now we haven't been doing, should it be in the sectorial skills strategies? Is it there that we should? But we have to do something with employers, the labor market, because one of the difficulties, but one of the richness of validation is exactly multiple stakeholders talking to each other, working to each other. I know you know this. On the field it is, I know, and it's happening. But how can we structure that? I mean, how can we come from those beautiful initiatives popping up, and how can we make this that it flourish and that it becomes not just something that ends when the project is finished, but becomes something sustainable? It's not easy. We don't have immediately the answer. Civil society, they are very interested. We have to embed that, and they are very important to catch all kinds of learning. Very important. And then, how do you, I ask this question a lot. How do you reach that individual? Are they coming to you? Are you reaching out? What's the way to do? It depends probably on the target group or on the individual, but how can we structure that? What does it mean? Do we need to put many more people and validation practitioners in the field? Do you need budget? Okay? Valuing. I deliberately changed valuing I use the term valuing instead of trust, but a lot of people are saying trusting validation. And there is some discussion, is it a good word? We have to see what's behind the word trust. What does it mean concretely? But it's about valuing validation. It must be equal. In France, if you reach a qualification, a full qualification, or partial qualification through validation, nobody can identify how you got it, through validation or through studying. This is not the case in many other countries. Is that the way to go? Or should, no. The design of validation arrangements, we see that the notion, the concept, but it's not a concept, it's something real, of learning outcomes is very central. It's also individual. How can we bring that more? Non-formal learning and NQFs, work to be done. Professionalization, I talked a lot about it. But that community, can we enhance, can we structure more conferences, more meetings, more networks, bringing projects together, listening? I don't know. Maybe there we can help. And then financing and tools. I have to say, we have had one peer learning activity on funding and costs of validation. Enormously interesting. But what is the outcome? It is very, very, very difficult to measure the cost of a validation, individual validation process, and to compare it, what it costs to do education. Is it a valid question to do research upon? Do we not need more monitoring tools? How can we show to the policymakers that validation is important if we even cannot show how many people have done it? We don't have that data, European-wide. You heard a lot of questions by Andrea, have a lot of questions by me, but that's the intention of our meeting today. So I stop here.